With us, our old buddy Stephen Cohen, Professor Stephen Cohen, contributing editor to The Nation, Professor Emeritus of Russian Studies and Politics at the author of several books, including Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, and his latest book just came out, War with Russia, From Putin and Ukraine to Trump and Russiagate. The website, thenation.com. And Professor Cohen, welcome back to the program. It's been a while.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a long time.
Yeah. So what is your sense of, and in fact, you just came back from Russia, I believe.
Got back last Sunday, correct.
Yeah. So what is your sense of the current nature of the United States' relationship to Russia? And having been in Russia for the last couple of weeks, what's your sense of their sense of it?
The relationship, and this I argue in this new book, War with Russia, but it has a question mark after it. It's not a declaration, but it's meant to convey my sense that the relationship with Russia today is as bad and as dangerous as it's ever been. And I'm mindful that most people think the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was the worst. But in some ways, this is even more dangerous, or getting there. This is due to a lot of factors, including this thing we call Russiagate. The Russians I talked with when I was there for a week, are puzzled about the turmoil involving Russia in the United States, particularly the allegations against Trump and his attempts to have negotiations with Putin in summit or other meetings. Puzzled and getting increasingly despairing. More and more, there's a sense at the very top in Russia, I mean at the Kremlin level, and this is not good, that dealing with the Americans has become impossible. And this, too, is unprecedented, and this, too, is a factor in why the new situation is exceedingly dangerous.
If the press reports are correct, and I have no reason to believe that they're not, after it came out that Donald Trump had been attempting, the Michael Cohen testimony, that Trump had been attempting to negotiate a Trump Tower with the Putin administration right up to June or July of 2016, during the campaign. And then Peskov came out and said, yeah, that's actually true. Here's the last communication that we had with Trump. That sounds to me like they've just decided to cut him loose. What do you think about that? What does that mean?
You mean that Peskov released this correspondence?
Right. And basically confirmed, at least this is what I read in the paper. I mean, I haven't seen a copy of the correspondence, but, confirmed that, yes, Donald Trump was negotiating, and this was, I'm assuming this is not at all illegal in Russia, and it may not be illegal here. It may just be highly, politically inappropriate. But that, he had been negotiating for a Trump Tower in Moscow right up through the middle of the, at the same time he was leading rallies, lock her up, while he was the official nominee of the Republican Party. That if Russia had been holding that back, they were in a way kind of protecting Trump, probably in the hopes of a better relationship. But now they've put that information out. That signals to me, and I'm not the wise observer of this stuff that you are. I mean, you're an expert. But that seems to me that Putin, or the Putin administration anyway, is saying, okay, screw it. It's like, we're not going to protect this guy anymore. We're not going to do anything with this guy anymore. We're just going to do our own business.
So we need a little context, because the allegations and the suppositions, and I must say the mainstream media account in this country of what we call Russiagate, that is, allegations that Trump was somehow compromised by the Kremlin or in cahoots with the Kremlin, totally lacks context. So let's take this episode because it's important. About 150 large American corporations have been doing business in Russia since the end of the Soviet Union and continue to do so. And this ranges from Kentucky Fried Chicken, Wendy's, McDonald's, to Ford and Pfizer, and all the big companies have found markets there. This is also true of major international hotel chains like the Trump Company. Trump began many years ago trying to build in Russia What's significant to me, Tom, if you and I were to go to Moscow tomorrow and walk around the city, we would see almost every international hotel brand, Marriott, Sheraton, Ritz-Carlton, all over Moscow.
I've stayed at the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow.
Well, then you know, right? What's missing, strikingly, is a Trump Tower and a Trump Hotel. That is, after all these years of trying, long before he became a presidential candidate, he was almost alone among the international hotelers who were trying to build in Moscow and was unable to do so. So if he had any swat with the Kremlin, it didn't manifest itself in what he wanted there. Now, this continued with people who, I don't want to be cruel, but operated in sleazy ways on his behalf, including Michael Cohen.
And Felix Sater and these guys.
Yeah, these guys, who operated in their own way, who were clumsy in Moscow. I mean, when they wrote to the Kremlin, to the presidential office, they didn't even have an email address. They sent to a general box. And eventually it came to Peskov, who's I know fairly well, who's, Putin's personal spokesman. So what happened then later? These people kept trying, even while Trump had become a candidate, and even while it appeared, I think the date you mentioned was June or July 2016.
Right.
It appeared he would be the nominee. So it has now become, what they did up to them was completely kosher, and exactly what scores of American and other international corporations have done. That you need permits in Moscow. You deal with the mayor of Moscow for that. But really big permits, like changing the skyline of Moscow or doing subsoil contracting, like mining for gold and oil, has to go through the Kremlin. So they were doing what other corporations did. What made it a problem at this moment was they kept doing it when Trump was virtually going to be the nominee. Did he know about it? I don't know. But it was on automatic. They were peppering people in the Kremlin with requests to help them with permits and the rest, right up until they killed the project. So I don't see anything, criminal or suspicious in this, just kind of klutzy behavior on the part of people who had been representing him in Moscow for maybe 4 or 5 years and kept doing so. They didn't stop when they should have stopped.
Well, where this may violate, if not American traditions, certainly American campaign finance law, is that and this is the hit on Trump about Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels, is that if he is essentially covering something up, and particularly if he's employing other people to cover something up that would hurt him in a political campaign, that's the equivalent of a campaign contribution, that process. And so if it had been broadly known in the United States through the first 6 months of 2016, or for that matter, for the last 6 months of 2015, when he was, an official candidate for the Republican nomination, that he was at the same time negotiating with what is, broadly across America considered to be, if not a hostile power, at least not a close ally of the United States. And we can have another conversation about whether that, how that should change. But if that reality or if that perception was widely shared, if Hillary Clinton could have gone after him, for example, or for that matter, Ted Cruz could have gone after Trump for saying, well, you realize this guy's in the middle of negotiating with Russia to build a hotel there. I mean, at the same time that a large part of what Trump was saying was, we've got to have better relations with Moscow. They got the Republican National Committee to change their position on Russian sanctions and on Ukraine, as I recall. That seems pretty bad, Steve.
It doesn't to me, Tom. I mean, you have bought into this whole Russiagate narrative.
Apparently.
Well, wait a minute. I do not. And if people want to hear an alternative view or read it, my book is not long. It deals with these issues. It's based on what I've known and learned over the years. This book, War with Russia, ?
Right.
So I've laid it out all there. Most of this seems like malarkey to me and one-eyed. So let me give you an example. I've already mentioned that if you take the attitude that Trump was doing something wrong with trying to invest in a big way in Russia, quote, as you put it, a country that is hostile to us or not an ally, that means you can't go to McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Wendy's, you can't buy a Ford automobile. I've told you,
none of them are running for president.
well, wait a minute. I mean, this began with Trump long before he became a candidate.
Sure.
I mean, what happened in 2016, I agree, needs to be sorted out. But, corporate investments take on a life of their own. Corporations spend millions of dollars trying to get in a position to make millions of dollars. You would agree with that.
Sure.
And Russia became an enormous consumer and extractive and manufacturing market. I think there's something like 9,000 German firms doing business in Russia and scores of big American brand names. So, including, household brands, the detergents we use, Procter & Gamble, for example, is all over Russia.
No, but again, the president of P&G is not running for president of the United States.
Right. Things changed in 2016. I agree. So let's look at what happened in 2016. It was lousy on the part of both campaigns. We can't just focus on Trump if we want to understand what was going on. So a lot is being made of this meeting in Trump Tower. I think it was in June 2016.
Right.
Trump's son, Don Jr., and a group of his associates met with this lawyer from Russia, correct?
Yeah, Veselnitskaya.
And they were allegedly, she was peddling something they didn't understand, orphans. They didn't have any idea of what she was talking about. But this was a big issue because the Russians had banned American adoptions of orphans, and there are about 20 American families.
And this was in response to the Magnitsky
That's
Act.
right, exactly right. So they didn't know about that. They were untutored, uninformed, unwise, and they never should have seen a Russian if they didn't know what was on the agenda, orphans. And when they kept saying orphans, the media said they're lying. They weren't. That's what she wanted to talk about. She wanted to give orphans for some company she was representing. And what were the Russians promising? It said dirt on Hillary Clinton, correct?
Yeah, that's what the email said.
All right. Now, at that exact same moment, what was the Hillary Clinton campaign doing? They were paying Christopher Steele through an intermediary to get dirt on Trump from whom? From Russians. Now, the difference is here, Trump didn't pay a dime. He didn't get any information. Clinton paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to this guy, Christopher Steele, and he produced this dossier. So which is worse? Well, as the Russians would say, both are worst. Neither should have been doing this.
Well, but wait a minute, Stephen. We're excising something from this conversation, which is that the goal of Hillary's campaign was not to change U.S. foreign policy relative to Russia. Or to the extent that it was right out in the open. She was fairly openly hostile to Russia. The goal of Veselnitskaya in her meeting with Don Jr. and Jared Kushner and company was to get the U.S. to drop their sanctions, and in exchange for that, they would drop the ban on Russian adoptions.
No, that's not correct. First of all, she didn't represent anybody, certainly not the Kremlin. She was a regional lawyer who had represented Russian corporations abroad, and a corporation hired her to try to get the State Department to drop a sanction against that specific corporation. It was a financial matter that was going to end up in New York courts. She didn't come to say we want the American government to change its sanctions against Russia. It was about this specific company. Now, it is true, as I think you may have suggested before, that at the Republican convention, correct, a plank in the Republican platform regarding Ukraine was changed.
Yeah.
But,
Stephen, we're going to hit a hard break in 10 seconds, just FYI.
But it was changed to conform with Obama's policy, which was not to ship weapons to Ukraine. So I mean, you can't fault the Trump people for that.
That's interesting. I'd have to know a little more about that.
Tom. I mean, it's just not a... So you and I are going to have an argument here, but a friendly one, because we've known each other for years.
Yeah.
Look, one of the theses of my new book, and it's for general readers, not for scholars, it's got, again, this question mark, Russia, war with Russia, question mark. One of the theses is that the relationship with Russia is more dangerous than it's ever been, ever, Tom. Now, you could argue with that. I mean, that's a kind of historical quibble, maybe, but it's exceedingly dangerous.
I will always take your word on issues like that.
And it's exceedingly dangerous because the new Cold War is right on Russia's borders. We've seen in the last week or two, I was in Moscow when this happened, this conflict between Russian maritime ships and Ukrainian maritime ships in the Black Sea, right on Russia's borders. And now there's a story out late last night, I haven't confirmed it, that the United States has sent a battleship to the Black Sea. Really a bad idea.
Yeah.
But you can see that we're edging toward Cuban Missile Crisis types of situation.
Well, also Ukraine this morning, it was, I believe in the Washington Post, that Ukraine has deployed missiles to the border.
Well, I don't even want to talk
not
about
missiles.
what's going
I'm sorry,
Ukraine.
fighter jets. Fighter jets.
But this is the tail wagging the dog, and that's why this new Cold War is really.
You mean Ukraine is the tail wagging the dog?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this provocation in the Sea of Azov, where the Russians have built the bridge, was clearly done by Ukraine for reasons that have to do with Ukrainian politics, not with international.
Now, this just to be very clear about this. Poroshenko is his name, right? The guy who...
Yeah. The president of Ukraine is up for re-election in March.
That's right.
He's got about 12% in the polls. He appears to have no chance. It appears that what he wanted to do was create an international military incident, claim Russia was going to invade, and declare martial law, which he has done in 9 regions in Ukraine. And there's been a struggle in the Ukrainian parliament by his opponents, would-be opponents, in the Ukrainian presidential election in March, that he did this to abet his chances in the election. So he had to back off. This is driven by internal Ukrainian politics, but it's dragging us ever closer to a military conflict with Russia. This is the danger. So what happens now? And here's where, excuse me, Tom, here's where you and I come, if not the loggerheads, to some kind of impasse. Several years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, you and I would be talking about something else today. We'd be talking about the danger of a new nuclear arms race. The evidence is everywhere. We'd be saying, oh, my God, what's going on with American and Russian airplanes flying in the same space in Syria? What's going on? We'd be asking if it's a good idea if NATO's undertaking a massive buildup in the Baltic region, also on Russia's border. And we'd be saying to ourselves, is this wise policy? Aren't we getting very, very close to more than Cold War, hot war with Russia?
Certainly.
But instead, we're talking about Donald Trump and his hotels, his desire to buy hotel. That is why I take the position, you won't like this, but that the Russiagate allegations and the American media's obsession with it, and particularly the Democratic Party's obsession with it, has itself become a grave national security threat to America. And here's why, very simply. You remember, was it July, that Trump went to Helsinki, Finland to have a summit with Putin?
Yeah. Stephen, Professor, we're hitting a break here. Let's recap this.
He was accused of treason.
Yeah, if you can hold on just a second. I'm sorry, I don't control these breaks. We will be back in literally just a moment, Professor Cohen, and we'll reboot this conversation and you can make your point again, please. Welcome back. Professor Stephen Cohen is on the line with us. His new book, War with Russia, from Trump and Ukraine to, from Putin and Ukraine to Trump and Russiagate. The book just came out. And Professor Cohen, we were just talking about how Ukraine, in some ways, has become the tail that's wagging the dog. Poroshenko is running for re-election in March. He's got a 12% approval rating. Questions about whether he's provoking conflict just for his own internal political positions and things like this. And then you brought it back to the summer of 2016. I'm not sure exactly where you were going with that.
Well, we came back to the summer of 2016 because much of the investigation of Trump and Russia has focused on that meeting in Trump Tower and the search for dirt on Hillary. And I just made the point that Hillary was paying to get dirt on Trump, also from Russians. Though personally, I don't think that Christopher Steele's dossier was actually based on any Russian reports. I don't think Steele was honest about where he got that information. But let me ask you a question. And you think about this, because it's become a big question when the Democrats occupy their new majority in the House. As I see it, we're at an existential moment in our relationship with Russia. Super dangerous. That's the thesis of the book, War with Russia, with a question mark, because nothing's predetermined or inevitable. As this obsession with these Russiagate allegations go on, and in the book, I go through the main allegations and say I can find no evidence whatsoever for them.
Right.
Most of this is felonious jaywalking, grifters, the kinds of people who have been doing these operations in other countries like Manafort for decades, Democrats and Republicans. not being open and honest about their financial transactions, but with nothing much political involved. That being said, I think we now face, and particularly Democrats, but not only in this country, a central question. Do we want most to impeach Trump, or do we want most to avoid war with Russia?
I would vote for the latter in every case. We have about 30 seconds.
You and I would always do so.
Yeah.
But I get the impression, listening to a number of these Democrats, like Adam Schiff and Swalwell and the others, that they haven't thought about this question.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it all needs to be put into a larger context. I agree with that. Professor Cohen, I'm sorry we're out of time, but it's
okay, Tom.
It's always great talking with you.
No, it is. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Professor Stephen F. Cohen, his new book, War with Russia, ? From Trump and Ukraine to Trump and Russiagate. It's a fascinating read, and I commend it to you.